All right. So, hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be talking about public speaking and some of my reflections that I have on the topic of impromptu speaking in competitive debate. In competitive debating in particular, um I would say that over the like my entire career and over time, which is quite a natural occurrence, there's a natural tendency to be skeptical of impromptu speaking. Mostly because it's not inherently leaned towards certainty, and it's also very risky to always rely on impromptu speaking or the skills related to impromptu speaking when you are debating. It's quite easy, for example, to prepare an entire transcript for your speech, to get used to the habit of maximizing preparation time, to write perhaps 99% of your speech, and even pre-write so many of your responses so that you could, in a debate, just execute it within the duration and the amount of time that you have, and then make your arguments, hope that you get it all out, and hope that everyone else understands it in the process. Which I think, of course, in the wisdom behind that entire history is that there is an inclination towards um being certain about what you are writing and what you are saying and what you've prepared. There's a preference to be more logical, more structured, so that we get it right every single time. And there's no other better way to be more prepared than just writing it all out and then reading it out in your speech. And of course, I love that. I think I respect that entire tradition. But what I want to try and move towards in today's video is at least an understanding of public speaking and impromptu speaking and its role in competitive debating, and why some of the misconceptions surrounding it, I would say, are misguided, or at least they detract from a deeper appreciation of what the sport could be, or what your speeches could be, and how you could learn more about yourself, how you could improve your versatility as a speaker, beyond just doing the same old rote habits of preparing the speech and executing it every single time, which I would say is not only boring, like for yourself, right? It's like very, very, very tiring to do that, and very, very, very unfulfilling a lot of the time, because you feel more like a robot than a human. But I would also say is that in terms of making your arguments and your speech more impactful for the round, for the people that are watching your speech, because we're eventually going to be giving speeches in real life in front of audiences of people that are imperfect, that cannot transcribe every single word that we say. Perhaps we should take a pause and think for a moment and see, are we able to communicate what we are intending? And if there is something that we can learn from being uncomfortable in impromptu speaking, then perhaps let's try and look at the wisdom behind that. Let's try and interrogate that, pause for a moment and think about what it means to be in a position of impromptu speaking. And then let's find out where we can do that in debate and how we can apply it and learn from it and maximize it given our current strategy. So, this video is not necessarily about trying to give up the entire tradition that we've already developed, which is, we're very logical, we're very prepared, we're very structured, which is probably what a lot of people want to strive and do in a sport about critical thinking like debate. Because of course we're not only here to just do comedy and do stand up all the time, but what we are doing is we are finding ways to magnify our impact in a round through our manner, through our style, through the way that we speak, and through the way that we will um understand what our instincts are towards communicating the most important things when all the notes are gone. Like when all things like are completely like out of your control, and all you have is you, your own mind, and your own voice. And I think that's the most important thing that you should eventually attempt to try and discover when you are in the sport of competitive debating. So eventually the conclusion that I want to strive towards is explaining that, well, given the push and pull, or at least the seeming understanding that we have of debating as like public speaking as the push and pull between, oh, there's the robotic, structured, spammy understanding of speaking where I will give the transcript, I'm done, fill it out, and then the pull between, well, there's an art to debating, there's the performance behind it, there's the visual imagery that we can communicate through our words and the way that we speak. If we spoke a little bit slower, if we spoke a little bit more beautifully. Of course, I don't think these are completely irreconcilable. I don't think as well that these are completely diametrically opposed to one another, as we might think. And so what I'm trying to say is that there are truths here. There are truths that we can understand from both that allow us to improve both styles so that we could shift gears in debating to make our speech more varied, more diverse. So let's go into it immediately, right? The first thing I want to establish, or the first thing I want to teach, is that when we are in impromptu speaking, when we go into the mode, like I would say it's like a brain 2 or a brain 3, like thinking fast and slow, and that type of analogy, if I could use it here. When we go into the mode of impromptu speaking, that you've conditioned yourself right now at this moment, I am not going to look at my notes. I'm not going to look at my notes. I'm going to elaborate on my point right now. I'm going to try and visualize it for the audience, look at the people directly, and try and communicate my thought, which is not on the paper anymore, but it's going to be coming from my own intuition, what my mind is immediately going to give right to my brain right here, and I'm going to say it immediately. The misconception people have is that this is a purely random process. It's purely instantaneous. You're just going to hope to God that the words will come to you. But I don't think that's the case. Instead, what we can learn from the discipline of preparation time is that impromptu speaking is a prepared endeavor. There is a lot of preparation that goes into the discipline of impromptu speaking. And here's my experience from it. When I used to do impromptu speaking, like the entire competitive sport of impromptu speaking, like when there's like a high school competition for public speaking or impromptu speaking back then, the format would go that, you know, you're given a random topic, you have like 30 seconds to look at that topic, and then suddenly when you're the next speaker that's called up, you just go directly in it. You're gonna be judged on your hand gestures, you're gonna be judged on your body language, you're gonna try and, wow the audience with whatever you're gonna say, with a very fantastic introduction, and then you're just gonna make your point, make your idea, and then you just leave immediately. Like it's like for a 3-minute, 2-minute speech, and then you're done. When I was learning how to prepare for impromptu speaking back then, what I used to do is not only go through multiple different topics, multiple different scenarios related to the theme of the conference or the theme of the competition. Like, for example, if there were a biology competition, of course, we'd be doing a lot of bioethics topics. If it were the theme on politics and Philippine politics and all of that, I knew that, oh, of course, there are a lot of Philippine politics topics that I can probably research on and study about right now. And of course, I was totally game to prepare and read up on all of that. But the more important lesson that I took from every single exercise, because, you know, there's an infinite number of topics that they could give to you in competitive debating, what I learned was there is a process to how you will eventually make the speech on the spot anyways. You know that you will have to give an introduction. You know that you will have to elaborate on your point. You know that eventually there is going to be a cadence to the emotion that you are choosing for a particular speech. So if I know that I'm gonna give a speech about climate change, what's the cadence? What's the theme of my speech that I want to give? The theme is there is an urgency to the world that is burning right now. There is an urgency to people dying. There is an urgency that the scientific community and political life has to adjust towards right now, that is more urgent than any other existential threat that the world is facing today. So I know that, okay, game, there is a theme, there is an emotion. That emotion provides me with a rough logical structure for what the argument would eventually look like. I know that the argument will include elements of, oh, there's an element of ignorance from people. There's an element of dissatisfaction, of state responsibility, an element of there are people that are vulnerable, that are suffering, and there's an element of greed, that there are power structures that are abusing against other people. So I know that like, if you think of it in that sense, right? There's a theme, there's a thematic structure to what you have chosen. You know that the topic will be about this. You are receiving that topic. You can latch onto that emotion. I don't know what the argument will eventually look like, but I know that there is a structure to the emotion of urgency on climate change. There are talking points that I might have heard before, which might help me make an argument. Yes. There might be images that make it easier for me to latch onto that emotion, like the image of, a panda on an ice cap that is melting, or sorry, a polar bear, or for example, burning trees. These are images I can immediately latch onto because I know that it's connected to a slew of other images and other associations and other arguments that I can eventually use, like corporate abuse and pollution, or greed from companies and politicians and their association with these conflicts of interests, right? These are things I can eventually use, make it easier for me to make a speech on the spot. That's the first point. There is a structure. There's a structure that you are choosing, that you have deliberately strategized to be the case when you are making a particular speech. That I would say is like the initial momentum. Like that momentum, it takes you wherever you need to go. There's some uncertainty, there's some discomfort with where you are at this particular moment, but once you've chosen this emotional structure, it allows you to make those sentences immediately. And of course, the rest is practice. Better, easier said than done. But this is so much easier for a lot of students to latch onto than just thinking, oh, I just have to come up with a speech on the spot and all of that. The second thing that I want to also highlight when we talk about impromptu speaking is that, again, let's think about what if you were to go and do an impromptu speech now. You take any motion, choose any motion right now, and then you just don't prep time yourself at all. You just do a speech immediately. You try and give a prime minister speech for like 4 minutes, 5 minutes, make one argument, make your case on the spot. I want you to try and observe yourself. Go and look at your own speech, record yourself, and then try and think about why you are instinctively latching on to certain things than not. You're gonna learn a lot about yourself. Like you really, really will. For example, well, of course, right? Like there are two elements here, right? There's the first element of when I started out impromptu speaking and then learning some of the habits that I had, I eventually noticed that, oh, there are some phrases that I use all the time, which might not always be strategic for me or might not always be that efficient. These are the words that try and waste time, that try and use up time, so that I could fill up the speaking time for the duration of my speech. So I would say, at the end of the day, or all of these different phrases of tone, right? on a manner and style speaking point, this is a very good learning point for you. It's a very good point of reflection. You think of to yourself, is this a problem of me not having enough questions to ask in my speech? So now you're like, okay, I'm using these filler words because I feel that I have no direction in my argument. So now you have choices. There are choices for you. The choices are, I can ask another question. Why was this true? What is evidence for this to be the case? Is there a reason for why I am making this point? Or you can shift gears. You can say, okay, is there a way I can illustrate this point a lot more? Can I visualize this point? Can I make it more concrete? Can I make it more humane? Or lastly, is it possible that I could maybe I could just expound this idea? Is there a way that I could try and elaborate more without repeating the same phrases over and over again? So I could focus on another stakeholder. I could focus on another source of the actor. I could focus on another impact and consequence that might come from this particular argument. This all comes from looking at some of the stylistic flaws in the way that you might, feel stunted in an impromptu speech. But that's on the stylistic element, right? That can be resolved quite easily over time, right? You learn to be more emotional. You learn to latch onto that emotion. You learn to get into the character that you want to eventually do. That you can do that. You can eventually learn to do that over time. Don't feel worried about that. But the more immediate one, the more immediate part that I think a lot of students will benefit from is that when you look at the logical structure of your impromptu speech, again, you did the speech, you did it impromptu, you were quite scared, you were quite terrified, maybe you didn't feel that you did the argument completely, and then you feel frustrated immediately afterwards, and then you're like, okay, why the hell did I not do the comparative? Why the hell did I not do the context? Why did I not explain why it was likely people would be characterized in this way, etc., etc.? Now you're asking yourself, well, are these logical gaps, in my opinion, are they a reflection of my flawed understanding of what to prioritize in an argument? Or is it that I am overthinking? That perhaps I was focusing on something that was very good already, and that my confluence of, this obsession with being so overly comprehensive detracts from my ability to deepen my focus on these particular points. This is so critical. This is an amazing point that I want you to think and pause about, right? In debating, in competitive debating, if you were subscribed to the school of thought of, I need to be completely spammy, I need to completely cover all my ground, I need to give 18 million preemptions against everything else in the debate, right? In a prepared speech, it's maybe possible that you can give 18 million preemptions. But I'm sure you know that judge is not going to appreciate 18 million preemptions. And I'm sure you also know that you yourself are not going to appreciate giving a speech where you're speaking at 18 million miles an hour, right? So, what are we learning? Impromptu speech, your instinct allows you to get better at being more focused, being more disciplined, and being more direct to what is most important. Your mind already tells you what's most important. Your instinct, your intuition tells you that right now, in this moment, when I am in front of a judge, when I am responding to this argument, when I am building momentum against this particular point from this particular speaker, I feel that this is most important. I know that I have to focus on this right now. And then you ride on that. And then you evaluate the consequences of that decision. This is a great self-introspection process that I think everyone eventually gets the hang of when they're doing this, right? Um Again, I'm not understating the risk. This is hugely risky. But I don't want to just say that like it's a choice that you make. This is a choice that you will have to make. A lot of the time in speeches, when you are like, even if you've prepared all that you needed to do as a first speaker, when you eventually say the words and the feeling that you feel from saying words, there's always a shift. There's always a shift that you might feel for yourself. I can't give the same speech the same perfect way all the time if I were just reading a transcript. That like there's a convulsion deep in my soul that makes me feel that there's something wrong with repeating the speech in the same exact way all the time. There's always something different. There's always a momentum that's different. There's an audience reaction that is different every single time, depending on how I say it. And so, your intuitions, your instinct, the way you build a point, the way you eventually elucidate that, also brings out that, like, those problems and those solutions for you too. So, the first thing that I said earlier is that you choose an emotion, you latch onto that, you make that the theme of your speech, and then you vary it within the speech. You slow it down, you speed it up, you use moments of silence to try and maximize that impact. And then you guide that. You guide that emotion according to a framework of logic that you have disciplined and practiced over time. You ask questions. Why is this true? Why is this important? What is the context? What are the reasons for this to be the case? What is an example of this? How does this look like in the real world? And between the moments when you are guided by your questions, by your illustrations, by your expositions, you are also guided by your own intuition, your instinct at the moment. Does this analysis make sense? Am I speaking commonsensically and sensibly for the time being? You're going to feel it. You're going to know it. You will know if you are not being understood. That is a feeling that you get immediately when you are in the speech, when you're in the podium. And impromptu speaking, that's the only skill that you have in that particular moment to be able to make a shift, to make an adjustment on the spot, to be able to elaborate on something that you feel was not being elaborated properly as well. So what are we saying here? We're saying that there is a discipline to practicing impromptu speaking. There is a discipline to being able to elaborate on certain points and latching onto an emotion. And there's also a discipline to failing in impromptu speaking, right? Being more comfortable with failure in an impromptu speech. And I don't want to just elaborate this as like absolute failure. There's so many different ways to understand failure and mistakes in a speech. You could make mistakes in your speech if you're just following your script anyways. So, if you were to make mistakes, learning well from it by maximizing your range as a speaker is the best part of the sport. That's the best part. Because that is the moment when you are going to immediately like immerse in your potential, knowing that, hey, I can do the passionate activist character this time around. Hey, maybe I could do the diplomatic politician this time around. Maybe this time I can now step into the shoes of someone that I care about, and I can invite the audience to join this process with me. And in my opinion, that feeling, the feeling of giving that type of speech, that's incalculable. That's incalculable. Because I don't even care whether or not the audience is going to resonate with you all the time. The fact that you're resonating with yourself, that's the initial precondition for you to be able to like open up your analysis to an entire different dimension of meaning, in my opinion. That's the awesome part about the sport. Um, what I want to do at the end of this particular session, just this particular brief reflections on impromptu speaking, and why I thought that it's very very important that people try and deliberately put themselves in positions of discomfort when they are training, is that I'm gonna give an example of like how I usually might train this, how it might look like when I make mistakes, when I try and give speeches that are impromptu with no preparation at all, like no prep at all, and do all of that, because I never give an exercise to my kids and to my students without like me have endured that myself over my career and over time, and I have a lot of fun doing it. Like I have a lot of fun being vulnerable, being put in that position, because there's a different type of confidence that inspires into your students or into yourself as well when you are the one that's now bravely facing your fear of public speaking, specifically your fear of like public speaking without notes or using the momentum of your emotion in order to be able to communicate your speech today. That's mutually reinforcing. Like your improvement as a debater and your improvement as a speaker. Like these are exponential benefits that help each other at the same time. You becoming more well versed about the world, like matter loading, eventually massively changes the way that you eventually choose your images in your speech. And then when you elucidate an example, and then you give that example and execute it, you don't need to rewrite the entire example and then like go step by step and then talk about the dates and all of that. You are in that moment because you know that information, you know that fact, you know that story. You can tell that story. And and don't you think that's freeing? I think that's so freeing because now you don't have to be constrained with what you would want to write on the script. Now you have all the possibilities of all the ways that you could take this speech however you want. And at some point in your career, I hope that you'll feel comfortable thinking, the way I took this speech right now, I took this in a direction that I loved, that I have no regrets taking. And that itself was the story. That itself was the memory that I'm gonna hold on to. It does make for better debate speeches as well, is my argument. But there's also the moral implication, which is that it's also just good for yourself. But again, let's do some examples, right? So I have some motions that I probably will just choose at random, and we could just do that. And we could just choose some of these other ones, and then we'll see how it works out. So the way I do impromptu speaking training with some of my kids is that we just debate. We just go directly into it. I go and get a motion, no prep time at all. I'm gonna give a speech. I'll see how long I could give it. Probably I'm gonna be able to give a speech for 5 minutes, and then eventually I'm gonna go and make them respond. They give a speech immediately. Then immediately next motion. We go into the next motion. We impromptu again. We switch sides. We do it over and over again until we cover many many motions. The point of the exercise, again, impromptu speaking, is not perfection of arguments, but it's the immediacy of, am I getting the intuition right? Am I getting the right adjustments right? Am I getting the right steps for every argument in the way that I would ideally want it to be satisfactory? So that's why I think that impromptu speaking is like, it's being comfortable without perfection. It's being comfortable with being very 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 imperfect all the time. So this is one motion. This house believes that prominent civil society activists should choose not to run for public office. All right, so let's do that motion. Let me just go get my timer, and then we can start, and then we can just see where this takes us. You look at the motion, you just breathe for a moment, you go and look at it, and then we'll see where we can go. All right. politics is a corrupting institution. When civil society activists inspire populations of people, communities around the world, on the basis of injustice and their fight against institutions of power that have subjugated them and their communities time and time again, it is only when they are outside of politics when they're able to truly be at one with the masses. That is the most important thing in this debate. I will run two arguments in this speech. Number one, why this generates better trust and empathy from followers, and it makes for more stronger and unified social movements. And number two, I will explain why running for public office oftentimes divides social movements, and it also worsens the character of these civil society activists as well. So let's go immediately to the first argument on why we believe that this is going to be very, very harmful to the social movement and its unity, and why our counterfactual is better. What does it mean to not run for public office, to make a commitment to not run for public office? What this means is that you are going to undertake an entire protest movement against regimes, against political systems, and boycott elections, or at least boycott running for those elections, and you are going to attempt to try and influence political reforms through social activism, through protests, through interactions with social civic organizations around the world and in your social community that you are interacted with. The problem with running for politics is that you oftentimes end up making compromises to yourself, to your community, for your own social movement, and for your own beliefs that necessarily make it harder for individuals to trust your credibility and trust your character as a civil society leader. Why is this the case? A few simple reasons as to why. The first is that in the process of campaigning, you necessarily need a lot of donations and a lot of funds. And the most likely way in which you would have to get these funds would either be through collaboration with different political parties, which include established politicians or establishment politicians, or, for example, include individuals from corporations who also have incentive to try and cooperate with you so that they could look like they lean towards social justice and are able to co-opt your advocacy for their own profit-oriented causes. Either of these scenarios necessitate that you would have to compromise with different individuals of the elite and of establishment politics that also represent the same institutions that are very oppressive against your own communities. So, for example, many institutions that have voted in favor of very, very, very harsh labor laws are affiliated with many corporations that have tried to strike down labor unions over time. Or, for example, many different individuals who are affiliated with the oil monopolies or oil oligopolies and big oil, big guns, or etc., oftentimes are very intertwined with the business segments and these politicians as well, and political parties, like, for example, the Democratic Party being very, very, very intertwined with this corporate lobbying, even within its centrist elements over time as well. So, in this sense, as a community leader, it becomes very, very difficult for you to detract from these spheres of influence. You yourself get influenced by this process of currying favor with the elite, and you have to get this money. And it also changes who you are, makes it harder and harder for you to be able to look like you represent the same interests and needs of people that you wanted to over time. What does this mean? This means that for individuals who have voted for you, who have trusted you, who have put their time, effort, and sacrifices and risked their lives to try and, represent your social movement, go out and riot and protest with you on the streets, they now feel that you are a traitor, that you do not represent them anymore, that you sold out to those corporations, you sold out to those political parties, and now they attempt to try and pursue your same policies, but they do not trust you anyways. And so even if opposition will say that it might be likely that you could convince them to some compromise, this is going to be far diluted and only be used to instrumentalize getting your minorities to the vote, and that is only going to do more harm than good in the long run. So, not only does it not create actual change, but it also abandons your own followers in the process as well. That's why trust and empathy is most important, because it is the precondition for activism, the precondition for bringing people together on that basis of suffering, on discrimination, on the feeling of being isolated and taken away from these institutions of power. The feeling of being represented, the feeling of having empathy is important for a social movement, because that is where people get communities, where they interact with each other, where they're able to build a movement that is genuine among these leaders in the process. And it's only when you're outside of politics, when you genuinely are able to have these stories and interact with them, where people feel that they can be committed and sustain that movement over the long term. The second argument is on why simply like social movements would not get social change, and why it is more likely that outside of politics, social change is going to be sustained in a way that is going to create those reforms. So what does it mean when we're outside of politics, when we exercise our influence in a way that pushes social movements towards being dissatisfied against these institutions of power? So what it likely means is that we have strong boycotts against political elites and political parties. It means that we have strong boycotts against corporations. And it also means that we're more credible as a civil society leader in being able to galvanize our masses around this shared protest among social civic organizations that are non-profit in nature. What does this mean? This means that we are more likely to be, one, to survive different election cycles, because both political parties do not hinge on one, or we don't hinge ourselves on one political party that might potentially lose. But two, it becomes a very strong social force of the opposition that is likely to critique both sides of the party and the entirety of the government over a longer sustained period of time. So we have more leverage against these political parties and against different social institutions because of the way in which we can leverage our protest, because we're non-political. We are outside of politics. And that is why civil society leaders are more able to like exercise that influence like over a longer period of time, because the next political party might overturn it, might change it, and it also might harm that in the long run. For these reasons, because we believe this creates more empathy and it creates better social change, I'm very, very proud to propose. All right, so again, let's pause, right? Let's pause and think about what that speech was like, and think about what were the weaknesses, what are the parts that I could absolutely immediately latch onto and improve on. What are the parts that I can also think about and see that, okay, if I could script this part better, what is the part that I am learning which needed more emphasis, which I will eventually need to learn to practice more and learn to deepen more. Right now, what pops immediately into my mind is in the argument of like, so in the second argument, when I am trying to elaborate on the counterfactual and why our change would be likely, perhaps now I'm thinking, okay, maybe it would have been better if I started off with the problem. The problem is that when political parties directly try and attack the character of civil society activists when they run for politics, they necessarily also take and destroy the social movement along with them, because they're a threat to their political reign as well. And that is why it is better if we're outside of politics, because now we can be more convenient and we can be more sustained with our advocacy over a longer period of time, rather than just relying on winning in one election. And I'm like, okay, now I could have done that as an even if. You could have done that as, oh, even if you might win an election, why is this more likely to get overturned? It's going to get destroyed. The progress is not going to be sustained, etc., etc. This is why, in my mind, when you're thinking about the impromptu element, right? It helps you clarify, how can I make the arguments more different from one another? The first argument is on corruption in politics. The second argument is on social change. And then the comparatives have to be necessarily different, right? Why in number one, the trust element, that's a consequence, right? The consequence for your followers. How do I interact that with, okay, how about my beliefs as a civil society activist, right? and then compare that against the other one, the other argument on social change. Okay, now it's about why protest is more likely to be effective, but it's not only about protest with respect to like trust, but protest with respect to social change. So that's why the arguments become more segmented with one another. In terms of evaluating like what I liked about the speech. So now I'm liking it that okay, empathy, community, trust. This is the part that I'm liking. I'm liking that now you get to be in the shoes of those individuals. I can elaborate on that. I can latch onto that emotion. It makes it easier for me to run the rest of the speech. And then, as you might have noticed, when I felt that I was getting lost in the speech, now I'm like, okay, what does this mean? What does this feel? What does this mean? Why is the most important thing? What is the precondition for all of this stuff in the long run? How does this look like? And then that helps guide through the argument. It's still not a perfect argument, but I would say it's still like above average most of the time, because now I'm realizing, okay, if I can do this speech again, I can practice this type of speech again, I practice a similar emotion. I'm learning more and more that like, okay, intuition was politics corrupts. What are the ways politics corrupts? Okay, now I give the example on corporations. I give the example on politicians, political parties. Now I'm like, okay, I'm getting the mechanism. Let's get better at that. Let's improve that a little bit more. And then we keep on latching on to, okay, how can I improve the illustration on corporations and corporate funding a little bit more? Now I can be like, when you are interacting with a corporation and when you are not interacting with a politician, you have no power. You are not established. You have no say. And that is why you have to curry favor with them. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's not that big of a difference, but I'm getting there. We're getting there. We're improving one step at a time. And then that's where we're getting our little improvements, our micro improvements in being able to improve our speech over time a little bit more. Yeah, no, that's pretty much it actually. That's one example of how I might do an impromptu speech. I'm going to summarize this entire presentation in this lecture now for you guys. What I wanted to just say is that impromptu speaking is a mode. It is a skill. It is a skill that is inextricably tied with all other parts of your debating. All other skills that you are eventually learning, that you are getting better at. It is a dimension that you like are able to access to make your debating so much more versatile, deeper, more varied in ways that you might not realize before. You can learn more about yourself. You become more confident in who you are. You become better at illustrations. You become better at your words. You just practice speaking. You practice because it's uncomfortable to practice. And I think the best part about getting into this mode and then getting out of it and then learning to strike a balance, if you care about that at all, like if that matters to you. I don't really think it's a balance necessarily. I think it's just a skill among a subset of skills that are many, many, many in part that you might learn in debating. What I want you to understand is that there is wisdom. There is wisdom. There is wisdom in immersing yourself in the art, like the subjectivity of that feeling of being exposed. That moment when you are like caught with like your pants down and now you feel that I have nothing else but this speech and my intuition in front of me for me to make this impromptu speech right now. And you're never going to be perfectly confident. You're never going to feel that I'm going to give an amazing speech. I also will say that you're never ever going to feel that once you've scripted a speech that you're ever going to feel perfect and comfortable scripting every speech all the time. Nor will you ever feel satisfied with any speech in the specific way that you expected it to be. But you will learn to be a little bit more comfortable in your own skin, in who you are. Um, and that's the fulfilling part. That's the part where you grow. Like you grow to be such a more brilliant, more like impactful speaker when you are really learning to be disciplined in maximizing the stage that you have. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching today's brief presentation, and I hope that you guys have a great day, and I hope that you guys learned a little bit. All right, see you.